This is the Utah Bar Sheldon R. Carter Life ceremony.
My Alabama Shakes, the first, the last, my everything very white in my life by the Beatles. Ain't Nobody's Business If I Do by Billie Holiday. Is This the Way You Are, Billy Joel. Only the Good Guy Knows, Billy Joel. You're Only Human, by Billy Joel. And When I Die by Blood, Sweat and Tears, which had our favorite, one of our favorite songs that we laughed about. Carter, stand up. We're very honored to have him with us. And he's got two brothers, Brent and Sean. And we have a court reporter here who's taking down everything we say. And there's some things we're going to give to them and the family so that they can remember Sheldon and some of the wonderful ways that we do. Judge Brady wrote A Memory of Sheldon, which is up. We've copied it. And you can get some of these if you want to. Some good stories. Marianne's going to read it later, but it's also, and Judge Davis has some other things that after I speak a little bit, and Judge Davis will share some of his things. He has to go a little early. Then Marianne, and then the rest of the time will be dedicated to anyone who wants to share stories of Sheldon, humor stories, whatever meant most to you about his life. And when I met Sheldon, we had some exciting run-ins and things that we did or arguments that we had. But what I would like to speak to you about to get it started is the thing that meant the most to me about Sheldon. And I remember when I first heard that he was having a bad time with his stage 4 diagnosis. And I talked to some friends that I was with, and we decided that we would assist Sheldon in his battle by bombarding him with filthy text messages. And so everyone we knew sent him around a filthy text. No response. He was understandably dealing with some problems that were well beyond filthy text messages. Round 2, we increased the frequency and the duration of the text. No response. He didn't do anything at all. He was a little preoccupied. Round 3 on the filthometer went up to the point where finally he sent me a text and he said, "What the hell are you doing? Why is everyone sending me this crap?" And I knew when I got the response, and when he started responding back to things that were affront to him, things that meant something that he should put down, then we could have him in a workable position where we could fight together and assist him in his goal, which was to last as long as he could. And nothing grows in fertile soil, even support. He had to have that. And no good fight was ever started or won by gnashing of teeth, crying. The kind of battle Sheldon waged was not for the weak or timid of heart. And I shared with him that when I first got my diagnosis of cancer, that Marilyn told me that there are 2 facts and 1 piece of advice. Number 1, we're all dying. Number 2, everyone we know is alive right now. And quit carping, do your best that you can with what you have. And so that was shared with me, and I got so much support. And I knew that if Sheldon had the same support, the fighter, the soldier in him would come to the surface, and that makes time more precious, and it elongates it when nothing that the medical community can. And when that advice was dished out to me, I wanted to dish it out to him. But first we had to have him in a mood to listen, and only 10,000 filthy texts did it. And I knew that what was said to me was true. This past January, about at the 21st, Marianne and I went and sat with Sheldon at his grandson's basketball game. And we talked, said our goodbyes, had what we had to say. And later on, after the basketball game, he said there were 2 things that were important to him about that day. He wanted his grandson to see him there fighting when he could hardly walk. And he wanted his grandson to know that he loved him very much to get up and come to that. And when you first get a bad diagnosis, you think about it, you can either spend your time being alive and fighting, or you could use it to just sit around and die. He did not spend his time just sitting around. And we believed together that every warrior must choose to fight and to battle. And when I learned that lesson, I was very young. My dad was a coal miner who died way too young from being in the deep coal mines of Appalachia, where he learned how to mine when he was 13 years old. But I never heard him complain. I never heard him carp about hardships or dying one whiff at a time of coal dust. And when you go to the mines every morning, you have to get up if you have to be there at 7, you have to get up about 4. It takes 2 or 3 hours of vomiting blood and dust so you can go out for the next day, so you can breathe in that dark dust that kills you and gives you the life your family needs to live. Because no life, no food, no burgers without going in there. And I learned a family motto that I learned real young. You never give up and you never surrender. And I shared those stories with Shelden. And we often discuss how fights must be waged. And when I first got my bad news, I told Shelden a story that I told my sons. And I came home and I said, oh, today was the luckiest day in my life. I get to go bald, I get to have surgery, I get to do wonderful things because you don't frighten the ones that love you. And my son said to me, are you going to die? And I said, no, I'm going to eat cancer for dinner. And years after that, we were down in Goblin Valley, and I was still on medicine and out in the sun and didn't drink my water, and I was trying to climb a goblin. And Chance said, come on, Mom, climb this goblin. I said, I don't think I can. He said, are you kidding? You ate cancer for dinner. And Shelden and I talked often and frequently about eating it for dinner, spitting it out, and spitting out the bones of the beast that they called cancer. And today at this celebration, when we are here, there's no empty chair here. There's no sadness about what might have been. There's no spot where the man we knew as Shelden used to be. There's a larger resolve, and his resolve is that if you think that he lost his battle with cancer, you don't know what battle he was fighting. He didn't lose anything. He fought hard. He won the battle he intended to win. And that battle was to let his family know he loved them dearly. And to have his family see that when you go down fighting, you fight till the last second, the last breath, and they see you. And they see you fight. And that's what he wanted to pass on to his children and grandchildren, was an example of a man who faced down death and lived his life with courage and resolve. And he might have lost the battle with the sickness, but what he taught others who knew him in that lesson was how you act when you know you can't win some parts of the battle. And if you have courage, I believe that courage is a byproduct of fighting with the total intent to survive, knowing that your ability to accomplish that goal is beyond your grasp. And it's something my father knew and taught me. It's something I've taught my children. It's no coincidence that in their spare time, my 2 boys are cage fighters. They fight and they get in there. And if you don't do that in our family, you don't last long. And Sheldon's the same. And you don't fear defeat. You never surrender. You never give up. And it's something even my little sweet 12-year-old granddaughter knows, and every day she fights a battle with a failing heart and organ failure, and she knows that in our family there's fighting Irishmen, coal miners, and you can do a lot of work with a little amount of time. Shelden knew that. And they're lessons that Shelden and I put in our lesson planners, and we wanted to pass that on to the people that love us, the people that stood by us, those things, and those are the gifts Shelden gave his family, his children, his grandchildren. And today, as we gather, there's wonderful stories to be shared and told, funny stories, humorous stories. But the story I wanted to share with you isn't so funny, but it was also a very big part of who Shelden was, because you wouldn't have seen his humor, you wouldn't have seen his kindness, and you wouldn't have seen his resolve if he wasn't a very tough man. And today, at the beginning of it, we're going to first have Judge Davis, who's got a schedule, and then Marian Hansen's going to read the story from Judge Brady. And then the rest of us will share stories with each other in this time that's very precious for us, as well as Shelden's family, and meaningful to us. And as we all share, our lives become stronger, better, bigger, and broader. And Shelden and I loved the battle. And sometimes when you engage in a battle, you know you're going to lose. It doesn't deter the fact that every day, putting in the good fight every day, is the goal. And often we would text each other 2, 3, and 4 in the morning, and I'd hear my phone go off, and he'd say, "You sleeping?" And I'd say, "No, I'm not sleeping. Are you bitching again?" "No, I'm not bitching again. I just wondered what you were doing." And long, lonely nights are part of the battle when you're sick. So are days, and sometimes you don't even like support when you get it, because it makes you soft, and you can't be soft. You can't be soft and keep fighting. But he allowed everybody to support him, and he never shirked the support, either with softness or with somebody just kicking him in the rear end and saying, "Get out there and fight harder and fight longer." And he was tenacious in that. And he always knew that until the very last breath, if you got 2 left, you still have a second wind. And he'd wait for the second wind, and he'd wait till he could get up and do that. And where I come from, in the hills I come from, that's the most you can say about a man or a woman. And I say that now about my friend Shelden. You fought very well, my friend.
I spoke with Shelden a few weeks before he died, and he said if I were ever a part of the celebration, first of all, he'd want me to make a motion to continue. I did send him a court order to get better, which he didn't, so he's, traditionally in contempt of court from day to day. I did want to share, first of all, a tribute from John Backlund. He said, "Matt and I regret that we are unable to be present today to share our memories of our good friend Shelden. We are in Spokane for the birthday of our granddaughter. With his love of his sons and grandchildren, I know Shelden understands. It was my privilege to be associated with Shelden in the same firm for 4 years. Before that, I encountered him often as a defense attorney. Later, I finished my judicial service in the Armed Department of the Court. Whenever Shelden appeared in the court, he would spend time in the clerk's office sharing a joke or a funny experience. Actually, it was good for the morale, but bad for productivity, as they would take a break and share a laugh or two. I observed him on many occasions take time to meet in the hall with a defendant in a criminal case who was not one of his clients. He would offer some sound advice and assisted those who needed help without any thought of being compensated. I admired his devotion to his clients and his resilience, but most of all, his kindness and love for Shelley and his sons and his grandchildren. It was obvious that they were his focus and his priority. Shelden, we will miss your funny stories, your compassion and kindness, your ability to use your personality to brighten a long day. I will tell you as a judge that from time to time that when I read memos from Shelden, I would often think, Shelden, did you think to have anybody proofread this memorandum before you submitted it to the court? On one occasion, I wrote him a letter. This was back 7 years ago, and I saved a copy of it. It's Shelden R. Carter, legal memorandum commentary. It says, I've attached a highlighted excerpt drawn from a legal memorandum you recently submitted to this court. Because I found the phraseology perplexing, bewildering, and nearly unintelligible, I consulted with the Honorable Claudia Laycock, who is recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on Sheldonese. She was sympathetic but was equally clueless. She graciously offered to grade the memorandum. Based upon reputation, together with past unrelated analyses, she was willing to perform that formidable task, sight unseen. After deep thought, I have decided to submit the phraseology to the publisher of the book, The Grouchy Grammarian, a how not to guide to the 47 most common mistakes in English made by journalists, broadcasters, and others who should know better. That's John Wiley and Associates. The publisher might wish to include the phrase in its next edition. The subject phrase might be deemed too formal on the high plains of Wyoming, but it is unacceptable and unsuitable to be filed in the halls of justice. Nevertheless, it's not nearly as egregious or as atrocious as selections from past memoranda. The trend is welcomed and heartening. Lest you perceive the court's censure of your writing style too harshly, it may be encouraging to know that if your goal was entertainment as opposed to jurisprudential substance, you very admirably achieved your goal. Well, having lost an identical twin brother and a father and a sister to cancer, as I watched and as I greeted Shelden from time to time in this entire process, it really did touch my heart. And I pay tribute to him today for his friendship, for his love, for his identification as it relates to the issues of justice at all times, and for the brilliance as it related to that concept of sharing and giving and hoping and serving. Thank you.
This is a story. This was written by Judge Brady. He couldn't be here today, but I think this is pretty typical of Shelden. And he goes on to say, I was a green, inexperienced, cocky prosecutor heading into a DUI jury trial in 8th Circuit Court in Provo. I had a case that could not be lost. I had a reasonable suspicion, probable cause, admissions, and intoxilizer tests that all said the defendant was guilty. After selecting the jurors, I gave my opening statement. I felt good. I thought I had done a great job of telling the jurors about evidence. Then Shelden got up. His experience, knowledge, and ability to relate to the jurors was obvious. He was connecting with the jurors. Instead of telling the jurors what he wanted them to find, oh God, I can't see very well, to reach their feelings, I made a mental note of it. I started questioning my first witness. After a few introductory questions, I started into the real meat of the case. In response to the early question, Shelden jumped up and objected. Leading, Your Honor. Judge Knudsen considered the objection and replied, Sustained, Mr. Brady. Rephrase your question. I rearranged the question, then asked it. Again, Shelden objected, and again, Judge Knudsen sustained. One more time, I tried to get the testimony out of the witness, and as quickly as Shelden objected, Judge Knudsen sustained. I couldn't believe it. I had a great case, but I couldn't get started. I couldn't ask a single question. I was sinking in mental quicksand. I was confused, nervous, and struggling to think of how to phrase my question. After what seemed like minutes of silence, I looked at the jury on the other side of Shelden's table. Then I saw it. Shelden was holding up a notepad to cover up his private conversation he was having with his client, and on my side of the paper pad, in large dark letters, were the words, "Don't ask a yes or no question." Finally, I asked the appropriate question, but just for fun, Shelden objected one more time. This time, he was overruled and pretended to be upset. I don't really remember the trial outcome, but I assume my side won. After all, the defendant said he was smuckered off his ass when she was stopped. I do remember that after the trial, Shelden invited me to walk down to the 7-Eleven on West Center Street to eat a hot dog and play Donkey Kong. Many years have passed since the trial, and Shelden and I have crossed paths occasionally. But I remember most clearly the day Shelden reached across the aisle to help a smart, alecky, cocky young attorney. I learned something from Shelden that day. Years later, I reminded him of the trial and his note and asked him why he had helped me. He just looked at me and cracked a smile and said, "You needed it." The 7-Eleven is now gone, and so are the 8th Circuit Court and Judge Knudsen. Now Shelden is gone, but I will remember the lessons Shelden taught me and the day he decided to help out a struggling attorney. And I think this kind of memorializes Shelden. I think anybody who's done any criminal work, was always there to help. And if I could just say 3 words that remind me of Sheldon, it would be deny, deny, deny. Those were his favorite words that he was always saying. And there's a lot of people here, so I'll make it quick. But Rose had wanted me to mention some of my funny stories of Sheldon. The thing that I remember most when I was working in his office is about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when he was done with trial for the day, he would put on his wife beater shirts and wear his little shorts, and he would prance around the office and walk up to everybody and want you to feel his arms and how buff he was. And one day he came out and he had on white lycra shorts. Sheldon didn't realize that they were see-through. And so he's cruising around the office until somebody said something. He was like totally embarrassed. We're all chasing him to his office. He locks the door and takes them off. So he was fairly modest when it came to that, but yeah, we got a pretty good laugh out of that. And one of my funny memories, just weeks before Sheldon died, he was working on getting his estate put together and those in trust, and I had sent him a text, and I'm like, oh wait, we have to hurry and change your trust and your estate, because my son Alex is actually your child, and we need to include him in your estate. And this was just weeks before he died, and he texts me back and he says, let's go on Maury Povich. And so that was kind of, he still had a really good humor even towards the end. And I love Sheldon. There's tons of people here who loved him. I run into people all the time who would tell stories about how Sheldon helped him out. I have heard stories of him helping out people hundreds and hundreds of dollars when their power was going to be turned off, and he would help them, and then the people would go to pay back, and he would say no. So he truly helped everybody, and I'm very glad that I was his friend.
And I guess if there's anybody else.
Scott. Hey, Scott, you're saying the closing prayer.
Yeah. Devotional.
Appropriate, this is right after the week of fast and testimony meetings, since we're on the mood. In my first jury trial with Sheldon was a DUI case in this courtroom, and one of my key pieces of evidence was that the defendant, after being arrested and booked into jail while he was in the booking process, he had told the booking deputies that they needed to hurry up so he could book out because he had to go play for the Detroit Tigers that night. And that was during the Major League Baseball playoffs, and so that was one of my pieces of evidence to say that he was delusional, he was that drunk, he thought he'd be pitching for the Tigers that night. Well, so after I gave my opening statement to the jury about that was one of the things they were going to hear, my first witness was the scoreboard operator and talked about an argument she had had with the defendant right before that. And then Sheldon got up on cross-examination and asked just a couple questions. First, what was the name of the team the defendant was on that night, the Detroit Tigers, and who were they playing? The New York Yankees, and that was how they named the teams down in Spanish Fork. So legitimately, he really was checking his watch and saying, I need to go. But Sheldon, I think that he tried to make up for the rest of us who often quoted the case law from Utah. I think he saw, you know what, we need to be fair to the other states and countries. And so I never was more familiar with Puerto Rico, the Napoleonic Code, Rhode Island and Maine, among others, that he would quote, often in different fonts in his motions. And as we would banter back and forth over the years about the virtues of the Jazz and the lack of virtue of Kobe and the Lakers, through many late-night texts, we shared a fun friendship. To that end, I'm a better prosecutor because of Sheldon and because of the motions he filed and his sense of justice. And so tonight, I'm going up to the Jazz game, and for the first and last time ever, I will be rooting for the Jazz.
Is it me? Oh, good, deep.
It's kind of hard to narrow all the stories about Shelden down to just a few. And as I was sitting there going through them, a lot of things came to mind. I came up here from Los Angeles after practicing down there for 8 or 9 years. And Shelden was one of the first attorneys that introduced himself as a friend and comrade, and we continued that relationship up until the day he died. We had the good fortune of sharing a parking lot with Shelden and his associates for years. And it dawned on us quickly that a great many clients would go in alphabetical order looking for an attorney. And Shelden was in the building next to ours. And so we would invariably ask, what did Shelden quote you? No matter what it was, we would quote less. And actually, we prospered doing that until Shelden caught on. Then began the adventure of him quoting substantially less than he would usually quote. But being subject to habit and the will to conquer Shelden, we would keep going down. And pretty soon he started sending in straw men. They were not clients. And he finally wore us out. And we ceased asking people how much he had quoted him. I admired his courage as we all watched him deteriorate physically, but never mentally, nor his sense of humor. More often than not, when I would call and leave a message or text him, his response was cause for some laughter. You know, he could be ribald, but never vile. We too would share an occasional story, maybe not appropriate for a sacrament meeting, but it was never one that made you cringe. You would laugh and chuckle. His sense of humor, of course, sustained him and all of us during those difficult times as he would recover from different chemotherapy cycles and invariably go to court. All of us that knew him and felt up to it would offer assistance in representing his clients when needed, and more often than not, if he had any strength at all, he elected to go to court and represent his clients. He did that right up until that final diagnosis where he was told that the end was in sight. And even then, he had the presence of mind to close his practice to say the appropriate goodbyes. I'm going to miss Shelden, but my memories of him are appropriate and good. We've been friends for a long time. Us old guys are sort of a diminishing. This old gang of ours is not quite as large as it used to be. But like Judge Davis, we used to, it's not unusual to call another attorney and say, have you ever filed a motion dealing with this? And, oh yeah, I did that. He had some success, so he, as difficult as his motions were to read, they had some impact. Because his conclusion was always appropriate. I always thought maybe one of his clerks wrote the conclusion because there was so much gibberish up until the conclusion. Well, someone understands it, but they were unique enough to where we saved them, and we have a collection of different forms that Shelden provided to us over the years, and someday we'll publish them under anonymous.
I am a renowned baby, and I will probably not get through this. Start off about his memos. A lot of fun can be made of his memos, but I'll tell you one thing, I will miss them dearly. On any topic in the criminal law, I could go into his office and say, hey, I got this issue. Hold on, I got a memo. and he'd send me 3, and you'd have to fix the font and the spelling and whatever. But he had all the cases, he had everything, on any topic, and I'll miss that bank of knowledge. Shelden was a good example. Tons of just good little pieces of advice. Rarely did he sit down and talk long, but he always had something short and smart to say. I remember one time there was an attorney who had done something that was not good. And I contemplated going to the bar, and I just remember Sheldon's words were, "My theory is you live by the sword, you die by the sword." And just one of a million things he said that just made me change the way I do things. When I got divorced, I had a period of time I bought a house, and I ended up staying up at Sheldon's house for a while, and every night he'd make me dinner. And there would be like steak and potato and peas and stuff. And sometimes he'd call me and I wasn't home on time for dinner. He'd say, "Where are you?" And I'd say, "I'm with some friends, Joe." And he'd say, "And here I've slaved away." But he was good that way. Shelden, his office was right next to mine. And every single time he walked by, first he'd have a funny comment. He'd tell me that his legs needed massaging, or was my wife ready to sleep with a real man, whatever it was. But he'd also every time ask how you were doing. You'd say, "Fine." He'd say, he'd always say, "Are you sure?" He's a good man. I'll miss him.
I just wanted to echo some comments that have been made about Shelden. As you've stated, I think Shelden had a great sense of humor. He was also a very caring person, and he was very brave. I've told the story by my daughter, and if you and I, many of you have observed, when he got sick, he would often come, maybe it wasn't sick, maybe it was before he got sick, but he would often come to court late, and yet they would form lines on the criminal calendar, and he would want to go ahead of the line, even though he was late. And so he would go to the head of the line, and he'd see Debbie or one of them, and he'd ask if he could step ahead. And no one could ever refuse him. They'd always say, "Sure, Shelden, you bet." So one day he's going to the head of the line, he's going down one by one. And they all say, "Sure." And then he gets to my daughter, Carolyn. And she says, "No way, Shelden, I've been here for an hour, you get back to the line, I'm not letting you in." Without skipping a beat, he said, "You're a lot more like your dad, your grandpa than your dad." You're a lot more like your grandpa than your dad. I thought that was pretty clever. He was a very caring lawyer. I may have been the judge that he tried the last jury trial with. And he really did a terrific job, but he didn't have the facts, and so he lost that case. And we were talking to the jury after, and I was just really touched about how disturbed he was for his clients, because he didn't like the outcome, and he really cared about his client. And but he took his lumps, and he filed a motion after the trial. And I once had a motion in another case of Shelden where he filed the same motion 5 times with different headings. And I finally told him I wasn't going to accept any more because he wasn't reading my rulings. And so I was surprised with this motion. But by golly, he was right. And there had been an error on the standard of law for jury instruction. He got the case reversed, and he got a better outcome for his client. And I thought that was a very caring lawyer, and made a real effort. And lastly, I think Shelden, as we all observed, was very brave, especially with his illness. I went out to see him the day after he had his tumor removed. He was not well at all, and I was just so impressed about how stoic he was, and how he said he was there to stay, and he was going to be around for a while. And he just really was such a great example of bravery. We'll all miss him.
I suppose it's only fair that I say something about Shelden in writing. When I was at the county attorney's office, Jim Taylor and I had offices right with doors right opposing each other, and we used to stick up Shelden's letters and have people put translations of what he'd said. And he wrote me once a letter that was about a page and a half long. And I don't know what kind of a mood I was in, my usual, I suppose. And so I went through it, and I made corrections in red. And then I gave him a grade, and I mailed it back to him. And within a couple of weeks, he sent me the same letter with all of those corrections made. But in the process, he made a whole lot of new mistakes. Because he added new sentences. And so I once again pulled out the red pen, and I corrected it, and I graded it, and I sent it back to him. And we did this throughout most of the school year that year. And every time he'd make the corrections, and then they'd come in with more mistakes. And so, but finally, about in April or so, it was in pretty good shape. And so I gave it, on the front page, I gave it a final grade of about a B+. And then for effort, I put an A. And then for attitude, I put an F. And then I wrote this note on the bottom of the second page, and I said, "Dear Shelden, I want to congratulate you on all the wonderful progress you've made this year," and blah, 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 blah. And then I signed it, Miss Laycock. And so, but we had joked through the years about the writing, and you had to work, but you got there, and it was great. I want to talk about some other things. My dad died about 6 years ago on April 4th, and it was a very short illness, about 2 months. And through that time period, Shelden was so kind and so sweet to me. He had lost both his parents by then. And it was at a time when I was doing municipal court. And I came into court one day, and the hospice nurses had told us the day before that they thought Dad was going to go in the next couple of days. And Shelden finished whatever case he had, and he asked to come up, and he came up with the prosecutor, and he said, "How's your dad doing?" And I said, "Well, I think it could be today. I think the end could be today." And he just looked at me and he said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I explained to him that Jim was on his way, and Judge Taylor would be coming in, and I was about to leave. But he was so sweet in helping me through that difficult time in my family's life. One of the other things I wanted to mention too was Shelden's love for his grandchildren. And there were times when I would set hearings, special settings that were in the afternoon, not on my Wednesday calendar day. And he would look at me and he would say, "I have to be out of here." And he'd give me a time. He'd say, "I have to be out of here at 4. I'm babysitting tonight, and I can't stay." And I would note that, and I'd say, "All right, that works for me. We're going to have you out of here at 4. And I'd look at the prosecutor and say, "We're going to be out of here at 4 because Mr. Carter has an obligation." And he was dead serious. He loved his grandkids so much and was so devoted to them, and would talk to me about them. And
thought it was so wonderful when I saw the blog that the kids did, and all those wonderful pictures of Shelden and his grandkids. And he expressed to me that one of the greatest regrets he had about leaving early was that he wasn't going to be there to see his grandkids. And I thought that was just such a wonderful thing to see from him, and to know that more important than anything, really, that he did for us in the courts and for his clients was his love for his grandkids.
In 1980 and 81, I was the Orange City prosecutor, and I swear I tried at least a dozen jury trials with Shelden. Nobody else would follow through like that. If they didn't get a deal, they would usually give up. And unfortunately, many of these cases involved DUI defendants with blood alcohol levels of 0.15 and greater, which presented a real challenge for the defense. But I've got to tell the story that I was there for as the prosecutor, and I think maybe some of you have heard this story before, but Shelden had a client by the name of Roy Rogers. And Roy was not the sharpest tool in the shed. And this was about his 5th or 6th DUI. And I don't know whether Shelden represented him on all of these or not, but whoever had been representing him had done a heck of a job, because Roy had not served any jail time up to that point. And so we tried the case, and he was convicted. And so we are at sentencing, and Judge Dimmick was the sentencing judge. And many of you know, probably could tell a few Judge Dimmick stories. But Judge Dimmick, after listening to Adult Probation and Parole's recommendation for jail time, for 60 days of jail time, he offered Shelden the opportunity to make some response, and so Shelden engaged in this discussion with the judge about how Roy was a lonely guy, that his disabilities were such that he really didn't have any friends, and so forth and so on, and that's why he had an alcohol problem. And he just said, I just don't think that jail is going to be therapeutic for Mr. Rogers. And the judge said, well, I think that jail can be very therapeutic. And Shelden just, I suppose, a knee-jerk reaction at that point said, well, if jail is so therapeutic, why not 6 months instead of 60 days? And Judge Dimmick said, granted. And of course, in reality, there was no harm done. He was just trying to stand up for his client, and shortly thereafter, he made a motion for a sentence review hearing, and Judge Dimmick, of course, went along with the Adult Probation and Parole recommendation. So it was just a good laugh and no harm done. But it illustrates the point that, Shelden really did go to bat for his clients in every respect. And the thing that, I was wanted to follow up on Craig Johnson's comments about learning international law, because at that particular stage of his career, Shelden always made the Scottish law closing argument, which I guess they have an alternative verdict, which is a not proven. The jury can find that the case hasn't been proven, and so he would use that as an argument. But the thing I noticed about Shelden that really stood out for me was that he was a highly successful attorney because he capitalized on his strengths. And his greatest strengths I think, were that he was a fighter, he was a bulldog, he would do everything, he'd follow through. If he didn't get a deal, he'd try the case. The other thing is I think he was probably the most engaging and personable lawyer that we've had in this community. He was funny, he was friendly with everybody, and he really did have such a great relationship with the court clerks and all the court personnel, as well as the prosecuting attorneys. And I haven't had the same kind of association with Shelden as I did in those early years, but continue to be friends with him and enjoy our conversations as we meet here at the courthouse, and I will miss Shelden.
You know, that comment about the clerks, it's probably fitting that I go next, because my first experience with Shelden was not with Shelden. I was called back behind where all the clerks were in the Orem District Court. And I remember looking up above the window before they remodeled, and they had all the wanted posters. And then at the very end, there was a full-size, blown-up picture of Shelden Carter's driver's license. And with the caption underneath that said, "Clerks beware." So they must have been different clerks, I'm not sure. But, you know, as a young lawyer, when I started practicing with my mentor, Mike Petro, Shelden was in the courtroom often as I would cover Mike's cases. And he was the go-to guy. And he was a go-to guy because of what's been said by many here today, and that was that he was very kind and very smart and knew what he was doing and had the savvy to tell this young buck lawyer with a lot of spice at that time, "No, that's a stupid idea, Scott. You're not going to get that deal, or that's not going to work." Or he would give me an alternative to look at that I hadn't thought of, and I very much appreciated that as a young lawyer. I watched Shelden through my career, and I've tried to emulate his caring attitude with his clients, and also his tenacity for justice, which I very much appreciated. Shelden's a good guy, and fun to be around, and always a good laugh. And I agree with what Dean said. You know, there are stories that are horrible and stories that are downright nasty, and Shelden had a way to make those funny and somewhat tolerable for a lily white Utah County boy. So I appreciated that from Shelden. You know, finally, these last few years, sicknesses and trials tend to do one of two things with people. They make you bitter and angry, or they make you softer and more compassionate. And with Shelden, it was the latter. And like many have said, you know, he would ask sincerely, "How you doing?" And then he'd always tell me to go to colonoscopy. And you know, first of all, I kind of got a little uneasy with that. But then I realized Shelden was telling me, "Come on, man, take care of yourself." Then he'd ask me how my family was. He didn't know my family. But he'd ask how my family was, and he'd say, "You know, stay close to them. They're what matter, Scott. And you need to stay close to your family." I won't soon forget Shelden. I won't forget Shelden. I appreciate what he did for this legal community. I appreciate him and a lot of the older, more savvy lawyers that are still around, who were great examples for us young lawyers when we started, as to what it meant to be a good lawyer, have camaraderie amongst the bar, and treat each other with civility, but not take it too seriously either. And for that, I'm appreciative.
I'm fighting allergies for the last little while, so we'll use that as an excuse. When I became a judge almost 5 years ago, the rule was you had to have a card to get in these doors here, and that was where the judges sit, and this is where everybody else sits. Well, I've had difficulty trying to follow that rule, as I'm just not real comfortable doing that, and so I come out now and again. But I think that as I've come to work some mornings, I see Shelden in there using the copy machine, walking down the hall. I'm wondering, if he doesn't have one of these cards, let's leave it back, because I didn't think that was the role of Shelden. I think the clerks have something to do with that. I know from my experience that the clerks really loved Shelden, including my own clerk, Amber. She spent more time talking to him than she ever did with me, I think. We really loved Shelden, and as he was sick, I would look forward to the day that he could get to court, and I would see him handling his cases, because I was worried about him, and I'd think about him all the time. But he'd come back in the office, or I'd see him down the hall, and he'd do the same thing. How are you? I'm fine. Make sure you get that check or whatever. And I said, you know what, Shelden, every day I pray for you. I think that caught him off guard one time. I said, you know what, as he was leaving, I said, you know what, Shelden, every day I pray for you that you can get better. And I think it kind of took him off guard a little bit, but it was the truth. And spent a lot of time hoping and wishing that he could get better. He is a good man. When I was just starting out with the AG's office, he did a lot for me in mentoring me and helped me along, believe it or not. And he supported my basketball team when I was playing ball. And it was a lot of fun to be around him. I enjoyed that. And when I was trying to get on as a judge, he would say, well, if you're a Democrat, you might be the first one. And if you're Indian, that might even be a little bit better. We'll see. I'll help you out. I think he did somewhere. He helped me out. But I think the greatest thing I can say about Shelden is when President Hinckley died a few years back, I went into Judge Davis's office and I said, Len, I think I'm going to give a moment of silence today for President Hinckley, because it was a Monday morning and it was my law and motion day. And he says, I don't know, Darrell, I don't know if I'd do that. And I kind of said, well, I did it anyway. Had a moment of silence, and then when Shelden passed away, we didn't have a moment of silence because I didn't think that was appropriate, but I did remember him. And an important thing that he should remember is, in my book, he was right on the same level as President Hinckley. I think he'll get a kick out of that.
Like Scott and so many of you, I was blessed to have Shelden mentor me as I was a new attorney, and I very much appreciated getting to know him. He and I talked throughout my career, and he was always willing to give advice, not only about the law, but we also tended to talk about this cosmic force that Scott laughs. He's had that conversation with me too. Shelden had this theory about this force in the universe, and he used to tell me, he said, no, Randy, we were talking one day about the fact that my practice was changing a little bit, and I wasn't doing quite as much criminal work as I did before. And I said, well, Shelden, I'm not turning away any cases. It's not that I'm choosing, it's just what's happening. He said, well, that's the force. What you're thinking about is what's going to happen. And where you put your energies is what's going to happen. And I thought a lot about what Shelden said to me. One night, I had a dream. And I dreamt about Shelden. No lie, this is the whole truth. And in that dream, I went to the temple. And Shelden was at the door of the temple checking recommends. And this is long before Shelden was diagnosed with his illness. And I could still see him in my mind's eye in the white suit and tie there at the temple checking recommends. And so I woke up the next morning and I thought, I gotta tell Shelden about this dream. And so sure enough, he was at court. It happened to be a day that I had a criminal case, and I couldn't wait to be able to talk to him and tell him about this dream, and the time came. And so we were, on the side of I don't remember which courtroom it was in, chatting and hopefully not too loud so we didn't disturb the judge. And I told Sheldon excitedly about this dream. And after I finished, he gets this wry smile on his face, and his eyes twinkle, as they always did, and he says, Randy, it ain't gonna happen. I love Sheldon. I always appreciated his sense of humor and his willingness to help me and everyone. He was a great man, and in his way, he was worthy of standing at the door of any building. Thank you.
Okay, so on behalf of the clerks, I think our chorus changed because of Sheldon, because now we have a system where we can see who continues the most hearings. And we can even pull it up by attorneys or law firms. So he helped change our chorus and what we do there. But really, we loved him, and he was such a great, fun guy to hang out with at the front counter. And I won't tell you that he often left a little bit of cash, and we always had yummy bagels or donuts once in a while. So that always made our day really great. So we really liked him, and a lot of us knew him well, and we will miss him as well. Thanks.
Shelden taught me and taught us all endurance. The first time I had an experience with Shelden was in a case that I tried before Judge Sam, and Chris James was there. And it was a custody case, and it went all day long. And an experience that I've had, which I've reflected upon many times, it was 20 minutes to 5, and I was tired, and I was in the fog. And Shelden, even though that was that many years ago, was a seasoned lawyer. He was not like so many of the young lawyers now that might practice years and never try a case. He had tried many, many cases, and I had just tried a few. And he was watching me out of the corner of his eye, and he could see that I was in the fog. I was so far in the fog and I was so exhausted because I had been so focused that I couldn't hear the questions that he was asking. And the questions that he was asking were critical to his case and destroyed mine. And I did not object because I was tired. I was exhausted. Upon reflection, he taught me endurance. He taught me, by that experience, when to focus, when to relax, and when to give energy to the effort in which I was involved. The last 2 or 3 times I talked to Shelden, he again taught me endurance. He said, to me, I'm sure he said to many of you, take care of yourself. Shelden taught me and has taught us all something about endurance. Thank you.
Well, let me just state on behalf of the court, which I'm entitled to do in my current position, that I'd like to thank Rose for scheduling this event. I think it's good to be here and remember Shelden. I like the battle cry, never give up, never surrender. We always thought his battle cry was, Judge, could I have a continuance? Going on. I made my tribute to Shelden at the Cuba luncheon about 1.5 years ago when we knew that he was on the downhill slide. And I would just like to make one point. Shelden was a remarkable guy in a lot of respects, but I really appreciated his civility in trial and his preparation and his expertise. I was just thinking, I think I've had 6 hung juries in the 8 years I've been on the bench, and 5 of those were Shelden's. I don't know how he did it, but it seemed like virtually every time he would come, we'd be waiting for the verdict and waiting for the verdict, and I'd start to get this feeling, well, it's Shelden Carter, and sure enough, we get a note from the jury. We can't agree, Judge, what do we do now? And so on. So he just had that talent, and a couple of those times was very fortuitous because his client, we had somebody come in and confess to what had actually happened, like in Perry Mason, and his client was definitely innocent, and he was able to persuade the jury to that effect. But wherever Shelden is now and what he's doing, we wish him the best, and we're glad that he's out of pain. I was sad to see him go that way, but we're glad that we all got to know him.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and Scott, you cried, I'm going to try not to. But what I wanted to say is that, and I can tell from all the comments that have been said about Shelden, during the last few weeks, he kept asking me if there was a way I could get him to the courthouse so he could come and see all of you, the clerks, the judges, everyone, because he wanted to say goodbye, and he wanted to say thank you. Because the continuances, and I stood in on a lot of those, and I can tell you the clients were so disappointed when I'd show up and say, well, I'm standing in for Shelden. That's not who they wanted. They wanted Shelden. But that went on for 2 years, I believe. And those continuances, I know it was hard on the court. Shelden knew it was hard on the court, on the prosecution. But he was eternally grateful for all of you having the patience during that time. Because I really believe, and I was talking to Brant, his son, about a week ago, that Shelden's ability to maintain his practice, to be part of us, to be part of this community, I think it extended the amount of time that we had with him. This was important to him. It gave him a sense of purpose. And so he would often say to me how much he appreciated and wanted to thank all of you for doing that and for being so patient. It was so difficult. His chemotherapy went on cycles, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. He would find out from his numbers how much longer he had, if the numbers were up, if the numbers were down. It was just an incredible experience, and so he really wanted to thank all of you for that. I wasn't able to get him here to the court because his energy levels were so low, and he would text me. I know after he had first learned that nothing could be done. I found it interesting that a day or so after that, he was sending me these urgent texts, or I think it was a day after that, to let Judge Laycock know what was going on, let Judge Howard know, these were the judges I was appearing in front of, what was happening and that he wouldn't be back. And so that's not something you say to just co-workers. I mean, you were all his friends. And I would never try to speak for Shelden, but I know he wanted to thank you, all of you, and he just couldn't get here to do it. So, thank you.
Like a testimony meeting. You have to wait around and see if you're going to get up or not. And I've already had an opportunity to, on a couple of occasions, to eulogize Shelden. Before he passed away, fortunately. And I go way back with Shelden. 1976, Public Defender's Office in Utah County was started, and I was the public defender. And I had a green kid out of Wyoming that came in and wanted to clerk at Shelden. And I went against my better judgment and hired him. And then when we had an opening for our public defender, he passed the bar. He and I worked together as public defenders for Utah County for about 1.5 years or so. And as Brent was talking, when you get old, you do a couple of things. You start talking about, when you're young, you talk about sports, you talk about girls, you talk about different things, you talk about cars. When you get old, you start talking about all your ailments, all the things that are wrong, your operations, your hemorrhoidectomy, which is not a good thing. Don't recommend that. Your things that are going on, you talk about your grandkids, and that thing, your focus shifts, and Shelden certainly had. Because he was, I remember him playing basketball. I remember him playing poker. I remember him
teasing Rosanna Tanner, our secretary. She was the person who was the federal court found entrapment because she slept with one of the witnesses in a case, and they dismissed that. But she's our secretary, and Shelden had a lot of fun with her in terms of teasing her and whatnot. She's married to a cop, so we had to be very careful. So we had a little office over where across from, I don't know what's there now, it's the parking terrace, I guess, for the county. And our office, we only had one desk, we had to share it. And the room was so small that you had to, the bathroom was right next to it, but you had to stand just so you could open the bathroom door to get in. And and we had an outer office, a secretary's office, a little bit bigger. But I remember a dartboard we had in that office, and practicing law can be a frustrating experience. You get frustrated by clients when they don't show up, and sometimes you get frustrated when they do show up. You hope that there'd be a warrant issued rather than having to deal with that particular person, and that happened on occasion. But we had this dartboard, and I will deny any comments about whose pictures we put up there. There may have been some judiciaries or claims that were judiciary members put up there, maybe prosecutors. Sheldon's able to find pictures, so we took that board down. It was just on the wall, and there was a big circle, like a blank space. The rest of it just holes in the wall. It started to fall apart, crumble. We weren't very good shots. But we had a basketball team. There's more civility, and I think it was to do with the way the courthouse is now. It's much more formal. Judge McDade was talking about having to have a pass to get in. In those days, it was in the old county building over there, the courthouse, where the PD is now, and they're used for receptions and whatnot. But you could walk right in and talk with the judge's clerk and the judge, and see a judge without having to pass through a gauntlet of measures and trying to get somebody on the phone who's never there to get back to talk to the judge. And so it's much more, and it's much more civility. I think in those days I only threatened to throw one attorney off the balcony when he called me unethical in court. And it was because we had a coffee shop downstairs, and so that's where you made your deals. You would go down and you sit in the coffee shop, you'd talk with the prosecutor, would come down, you'd have a Diet Coke or decaffeinated beverage or a non-caffeinated beverage, your choice, and maybe you might just having some of the food they had there, which was not really always the best. The egg sandwich, I don't recommend it. And that's where you dealt with each other. And then we had the basketball team, which was the attorney's basketball team, and we'd go out at noon and play out at the detention center. And then we entered a league, and we played up where the old library is now, or the new library is now, upstairs. They had a building up there, but the floor would just shake when you go up down the floor. Judge Taylor was our center in those days. Craig Snyder actually played basketball. He could move, actually, at pace faster than a snail in those days. He was only about half of his final weight, and he liked to hog the ball. I remember that never passed. Didn't know the passing game. But Shelden played there, and Brian Harrison. We just had a bunch of guys, and including prosecutors and defense. We don't do that anymore. We seem to be a lot of separation now, a lot more, maybe we're more into ourselves. I don't know what it is that fosters this, but the bar was a lot smaller. I went to a bar meeting a few weeks ago and didn't know anybody there but myself, and sometimes I wasn't sure I was there. But, then you knew everybody by name, and our bar functions, when I was president of the bar, I think it's 1980, it's been a few years, one of our meetings, we had Gene Fulmer come and showed prize fights. That was our ethical part of it. But we had a good time, and we played poker, little nickel ante, penny ante, quarter game. Never lost more than $300 at a time. It's just a friendly game. And Sheldon participated in those, but what I really like about Sheldon is the way he treated his clients. And Dean was talking about undercutting undercutting Shelden once, and I'll tell you a story about Dean. I had a client once that, I think Judge Lakelock was a prosecutor on this one. I was down in Spanish Fork, and this client was charged with an offense that had controlled substance by her. She was in the car, and had a roadblock, and her purse was in the car, and they searched the car, and also searched the purse. So she came in to see me, and I quoted her fee. And then she said, okay, fine, left, and I thought, well, that's too high. So she went over and saw Dean. Dean told me the story, that's why I know about it. And he asked about this. He said, you know that client that you had, did you end up representing her? And I said, yeah. And he said, why? And he said, well, she came over and I asked what you were charging, and quoted her, and she said that you'd quoted her X amount of dollars, and so I quoted her $1,000 less. And she said, well, she got up to go, and she said, where are you going? He said, I'm going back to Esplanade. You must not be very good here. I suspect some of that may have happened with Dean, with Shelden's cases, because Shelden's clients were pretty loyal to him. And it was because in criminal law, and I have to say, I looked in the Bar Journal last time it came out, and I was going to disciplinary pages to make sure I wasn't in there. But on the way back there, I came across these pro bono awards, and they were to people from big firms who have spent a lot of hours, in pro bono, and that's all well and good. I mean, that's good that they do that. But what goes without saying is what Shelden and I call pro bono stupid old work. That's where you take a case either for nothing, because you know the client and you feel obligated, and or their parents are there and they're hollering about it and they want you to take the case, so they're promised to pay, it never comes out, or you take the case for a nominal fee and it turns into a bloodbath because the client gets other cases, and so you're on those cases and you can't get out and you feel obligated to go forward. And Shelden had a lot of those cases where he wasn't in it for the money. He more liked the idea of the intellectual pursuit of trying to find some way to get around a dead bang case. And I always characterized this about Shelden as thinking outside the box, because he did. He would come up with some of the awfulest, disjointed, unappealing arguments, but sometimes they worked. And if you Google Shelden's name, you will see, I don't know, must be over 60 or 70 cases he appealed. So he just didn't let them die. He went on with them, and he believed in them, and he fought for his clients. And I think that's the one quality, one of the best qualities I saw in Shelden. I know he was personable. I know he was engaging. He was fun to practice with. I practiced with him. I prosecuted against him, and I tried cases with him. And so I saw all sides of him, and I enjoyed trying cases with him. He just had that. But I would say the thing that the qualities he had were two. One was his love of the law and of the Constitution. Now, I've heard some prosecutors say, well, Shelden gets up there and wraps himself in the Constitution. He talks about John Adams and how this, that, and the other, nothing to do with the case. Well, Shelden believes all that crap, He believes it, and he fought for it, and he felt that's what the law was, that's what it should be. And he actually believes in the presumption of innocence, which is an unusual thing, in today's society. But the other thing is if you had Shelden, you're his client, he was going to fight for you. You knew that. And he did it time and time again, and he enjoyed the fight. And there's nothing, and he was not above anything legal. We got into a case we had and here recently, and he said, how's your case going? And this is what we were talking about, and he had a bad case. It doesn't look too bad. He says, I guess I'm going to have to play the cancer card. And, I would have to say that my life has been a lot richer for knowing Shelden and associating with him, and I will certainly miss him.
I met Shelden probably about 12 years ago. DUI hearings at the driver's license division.
time he came in, I actually didn't care for Shelden, which I know is surprising to a lot of people. But it was the very first day I'd met him, and I asked him if he wanted a copy of the, you know, all the documents, and he said, well, you're not my wife, I can make my own copy. And I just thought, who are you? So, you know, this went on for probably about a week or two, and I just thought, I don't like this guy. He's just super arrogant. And I don't think it was Shelden being arrogant, it was just he was used to his own way. He had made his own copies. Like, why did I need to make his copies? So probably about 3 weeks into our encounters with each other, we finally started having small talk after the hearings and whatnot, and he was asking me what I was doing that weekend. I said, oh, I'm going to go watch my sons play some baseball, and, you know, it was summertime, so it was hot outside, and he said, oh, well, if you decide to, you know, wear a bikini on the bleachers, call me, I'll come down and watch games with you. And I thought, is he for real? And so I looked at him, you know, kind of all shocked, and I said, does that work for you? And he said, occasionally, and I said, okay. And after that, you know, we just were great friends. So every time he'd come in and do a hearing, I'd just love to hear what he'd have to say, or his little jokes, or we'd banter back and forth, and you know, and that's what you loved about Shelden, was just his sense of humor. It was always great, and even up until the end, it was great. The day after he had his last surgery, he had texted me and said things don't look good or whatnot, and then, you know, I was pretty somber, and then I was trying to text him back and didn't really have the right words to say, and he said, will you do me one favor? And I said, yeah, anything you want. And he said, at my funeral, throw your body in front of my casket and yell, what about our babies? And that's Shelden. And that, you know, as down as he had to be in that situation, he knew all of his friends were down too, and had to give them a laugh and that last little bit of hope for him. So anyway, I'll just miss him forever, and he was a great guy.
Is there anyone else that wants to come up before we end? I think that we thank Shelden today, and we thank ourselves for our community and that produces a connection that transcends our differences. The largest living organism on this planet is an aspen grove in Colorado. And all the different trees grow up of all different heights, but they have one root system and one organism. We lost one of the little aspens that forms the many aspens in our grove that got cut down, but the grove remains, and he remains with us. And we thank him, and we thank ourselves, and we're going to have a transcript made of this that we'll provide to Shelden's family. There's the CDs. If any of you want them, you can get them. The songs remind me of Shelden, but there's plenty more that I'm sure that remind you of Shelden. And then if we run out, I can always burn some more if you like them, but thank you for coming, and I'm sure he's listening and had a good laugh with us. Want his drinks and cookies outside because Judge Lakehart